surged to a record high 2.1 trillion US dollar, while the international community failed to mobilize 100 billion US dollar for climate actions. The nuclear risk reaches its highest point in decades, but that was still not enough for the NPT review conference to achieve any collective commitment to action. The outbreak of armed conflicts and heightened tension, especially between major powers, have made the international security climate more volatile than at any time since the Cold War. The climate crisis and other non-traditional security risks threaten our very existence. The COVID-19 pandemic have wreaked havoc on health systems, economies, and societies worldwide. Poverty, inequalities, violence, and exclusion are denying the rights of millions to the basic necessities of life. With less than a decade to go, the Sustainable Development Goals are even further off track. Facing these multiple crises, developing countries and vulnerable groups who lack the capacity, resources, and resilience to cope with external shocks are those hardest hit. To reverse this course, we must fundamentally change our ways of thinking and doing things. This entails reshaping a global approach to address global issues, enhancing resilience, and placing people at the core of all development efforts. And key to such an approach is international solidarity and partnership at all levels. We know this from our own history. International solidarity has been crucial for the success of Vietnam's national liberations and reunification. Multilateralization and diversification of partnership, meanwhile, have proven indispensable in Vietnam's foreign policies of independence, self-reliance, peace, cooperation, and development. They have opened the door for Vietnam to the world and helped bring catalytic resources to propel Vietnam's đổi mới renovation process. They have helped improve the lives of tens of millions of Vietnamese and brought prosperity to a formerly war-torn country and now confidently on a path to become a developed, high-income country by 2045. But I believe the experience of Vietnam is not an exception. There is abundance of stories about how solidarity and partnership triumph over mistrust and fragmentations and bring about positive change. Mr. President, as we move forward in the spirit of solidarity and partnership, I wish to underline 4 key points. First, a confrontational and zero-sum game approach must be eliminated. Imposition, interventions, and unilateral acts have no place in the good conduct of international affairs. Major powers are particularly looked upon to behave responsibly and work for the common good and not their own selfish interests. Vietnam calls for strengthened multilateralism and international cooperation in the spirit of openness, inclusiveness, equality, and mutual benefit. Major UN and international agendas, especially the 2030 agenda and climate actions must not be put on hold due to isolated disagreements among countries. We must stay focused on our common goals and responsibilities. We stand in firm solidarity with the people of Cuba and call for the immediate lifting of the unilateral embargoes against Cuba, contrary to international law. Second, our actions, both individually and collectively, must be guided by and in accordance with international law and the UN Charter. Vietnam firmly believes that respect for international law, especially vis-à-vis the respect for sovereign equality, political independence, and territorial integrity of states. The peaceful settlement of disputes is the most effective and viable measures to prevent conflicts and promote sustainable peace and security. Constructive dialogue and respect for the legitimate rights and interests of all parties, in accordance with international law, are key to resolving differences and reducing tensions. Vietnam calls for the cessation of hostilities in Ukraine and stands ready to contribute to the diplomatic process and the reconstruction and rehabilitation of Ukraine. Third, we need strong and effective multilateral institutions with the UN at the heart to best address global challenges. They are best positioned to initiate and incubate transformative ideas, approaches, and solutions, and to forge partnership and mobilize resources for the implementations of these initiatives. Vietnam welcomes the forward-looking proposals in the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda report. We will engage actively in the deliberations of these proposals and in the preparations of the Summit for the Future and the SDG Summit. We have high hopes for this summit. This summit will provide concrete, meaningful, and long-lasting commitments and actions. Fourth, regional organizations can pioneer and play a prominent role in bolstering multilateral cooperation. In Southeast Asia, ASEAN is doing its part to help address regional and global issues. We are working to build a strong and united ASEAN community and advance the central role of ASEAN in the regional security architecture. Building a broad and extensive network of partnership, ASEAN has created a premier forum for strategic dialogue, engaging important partners of the region, especially with major powers. ASEAN is working hard to implement the 5-point consensus to have 5 comprehensive solutions to the situations in Myanmar. Vietnam underlines the need for maintaining peace, stability, maritime safety, and security in the South China Sea, and call on all parties to resolve disputes by peaceful means with full respect for legal and diplomatic processes. We call on parties to exercise self-restraint, refrain from unilateral activities, and attempts to change the status quo, and not to threaten or to use force in accordance with international law, including the United Nations Charter and UNCLOS 1982. Mr. President, this year, Vietnam celebrates its 45th year as a member of the United Nations. Since that September Day in 1977, the UN has been a trusted friend and reliable partner, standing with us in our most difficult time of post-war reconstruction and more recently in the fight against COVID-19, and accompanying us on our path of Đôi mới renovation, improving our people's life and advancing the country's development. Welcoming Vietnam to the United Nations 45 years ago, President of the 32nd sections of the General Assembly highlighted Vietnam's dedication to the purposes and principles and affirmed that, and I quote, "The admission of Vietnam marks a further step towards consolidating peace and security in the world." End of quote. 45 years on, and this statement remains valid. Vietnam's history and its vision for the future has always been intimately linked with the aspirations for peace and development. We have consistently supported and pursued a balanced and constructive approach in seeking lasting solutions to global issues. As members of major UN bodies, most recently the Security Council, Vietnam has consistently underlined the importance to uphold the UN Charter and to ensure that the UN best serves the needs and interests of all members. Our men and women are proudly serving in UN peacekeeping missions in South Sudan, Abyei, and Central African Republic. Vietnam is sparing no efforts to realize our commitment to achieve net zero emissions by 2050, an ambitious goal given the level of development and technology capacity of Vietnam. At the Human Rights Council, Vietnam has consistently worked to advance mutual understanding and respect, foster dialogue and cooperation. We lead efforts to promote the rights of vulnerable groups in the context of climate change. And now, we are aspiring a seat at the Human Rights Council for the term 2023 to 2025. I hope we can count on your valuable support, just as you can count on us as a reliable, responsive, and constructive partner in the promotions and protections of human rights for all. Mr. President, in unity there is strength. With solidarity and partnership, there is power. Let us work together in unity, solidarity, and a spirit of partnership to surmount the interlocking challenges we all are facing together. In this watershed moment, for the sake of sustainable peace and development in the world. I thank you, Mr. President.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister of Vietnam. I now give the floor to His Excellency Salam Sai Komasit, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Lao People's Democratic Republic.
Mr. President, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to begin by extending my sincere congratulations to His Excellency Sabah Ghorrosy on his election as President of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly, and I wish him a successful presidency of this UNGA session. I have the honor to speak on behalf of the Lao People's Democratic Republic in this August Assembly. Mr. President, we are at a critical juncture when the international community is facing multifaceted challenges ranging from armed conflicts to environmental crisis and economic downturn that set back global development. Multilateralism is always at the heart of international cooperation, has been undermined by unilateralism, has been applied widely. These challenges, already exacerbated by COVID-19 pandemic, have hindered and reversed the development gains attained during the past decades. The implementations of the SDG has never before been so tarnished. It is disheartening that the most vulnerable peoples and countries are now suffering the most. Countries in special situations such as LDCs, LLDC, and SEEDs, which have endured the most difficult period coping with COVID-19 impacts, are additionally confronting climate, food, energy crisis. It is more alarming than ever for the international community to find solutions not only transformative, but also more practical, effective, action-oriented, sustainable, and tailored to the most pressing need, so the most vulnerable are not left behind. Mr. President, 77 years after the United Nations was formed, we shall no longer be here in this august assembly to state any claim, lecture, blame, or shame one another. Our world needs greater attention, concerted effort, and common desire. We, as stipulated in the Charter, are the people of the United Nations. We shall gather here to find the most appropriate solution and take the most urgent action to address the problem we are all facing today. This cannot be done without firmly upholding the principle of the UN Charter and preserving multilateralism. Our United Nations was founded to prevent another catastrophic world war. Our shared wisdom and political will to find the most pragmatic and suitable solution to multiple crises threatening us all today must lie on the top of other individual interests. In doing so, we must strengthen our solidarity, cooperation, and collaboration, and must not create confrontation and division. As such, it is necessary, and after more than 7 decades, that the United Nations revitalizes and increases its ability to effectively address global problems. In this context, the United Nations needs to effectively fulfill its mandate in maintaining international peace and security, as well as promoting development cooperation. It is our common desire that the United Nations be transformed in order to respond to the current global landscape and needs in our joint effort to overcome the unfolding challenges which threaten international peace and development. The international community must find peaceful and lasting resolution to any conflict and disputes around the world, including the Middle East problem. We believe that unilateral sanction or measures cannot be effective, as it is not only contravened to the principle of the Charter of the United Nations and international law, but also hampers the national development of other countries. Sanctions, regardless to their forms, will not only end up compromising one's own interests as well as those of others and inflicts suffering on everyone. We must also give more opportunity to peaceful solutions based on our mutual interests and build an environment conducive to development so as to safeguard the lasting peace and prosperity for all. In this regard, my delegation once again joins overwhelming global call for lifting of the economic embargo on Cuba and putting an end to all unilateral coercive measures which have caused more negative impacts on the innocent people. Mr. President, ASEAN has enjoyed long-lasting peace, security, stability, which serve as favorable conditions for the national socio-economic development of all member states. We in ASEAN continue to promote regionalism and multilateralism that emphasize the importance of centrality, unity, and inclusivity, mutual benefit and respect, which form a solid foundation in all essential frameworks of ASEAN cooperation in ASEAN. The Lao PDR has actively participated and contributed with great responsibility under the framework of ASEAN to promote peace and stability. On this note, the Lao PDR considers the role played by ASEAN as crucial in creating an environment conducive to a return to normalcy in Myanmar, and we should continue to engage Myanmar so as to ensure the continuation of delivery of humanitarian assistance to the people of Myanmar and explore ways and means to ensure Myanmar full and effective implementation of the 5-point consensus towards tangible outcome. Mr. President, since the inception of 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development in 2015, the Lao government has presented 2 voluntary national reviews in 2018 and 2021, reflecting progress made and challenges encountered in the implementation of SDGs through the National Socio-Economic Development Plan and 2030 Vision and Green Growth Strategy. Nevertheless, throughout the past 3 years, the COVID-19 pandemic has imposed direct impact on socio-economic development of every country, especially the least developed countries, including the Lao PDR. Therefore, the progress made prior to COVID-19 in the implementation of our national development and international commitment like SDG and others has been severely undermined, affecting the livelihood of the people in all dimensions. In addition, we are also facing extreme weather events due to climate change in different parts of the world. Like many other countries, the Lao PDR remains vulnerable to external shocks and has been severely affected by natural disaster, especially extensive floodings. Over the past years, our government has attached great importance to combating climate change through the implementation of the revised nationally determined contribution that clearly outlines ambitious targets of the national action for tackling and mitigating climate change toward achieving net zero emissions by 2050. To this end, there is pressing need for adequate financial resources and technical support for gaining access to climate finance and other sources of funding to support developing countries, especially LDCs, LDC, and SEEDs, to achieve their development goals and commitment made under the Paris Agreement. In this regard, we call for renewed political will coupled with concrete action taken by international community in the upcoming COP27 to preserve our planet for many generations to come. Mr. President, having recognized multidimensional challenges and special needs of the group of countries in special situations, the Lao PDR is strongly committed to the implementation of the internationally agreed development goals and program of actions for LDCs and LDCs and LDCs and other UN development cooperation frameworks. The Lao PDR remains hopeful and firmly believes that multilateralism, with the United Nations as the lead institution, the multiple crises and challenges in the international community is facing can be appropriately addressed. We are strongly committed to supporting conflict resolution through peaceful means, guided by the UN Charter and other relevant international laws. We trust that development cooperation for common interests and shared benefit must continue to be at the core of international relations. Towards this end, more action-oriented solutions and non-politicized approaches must be adopted. It is our hope that this UNGA 77 will offer opportunities to enhance our solidarity and revive sustainable development path in order for us to ensure transformative solutions for better livelihoods of our people and planet. I would like to end my statement by expressing on behalf of the Lao government and people my sincere appreciation to all member states for the kind support for our membership of the ECOSOC for the period 2023-2025. We stand ready to humbly serve and make meaningful contribution to the work of ECOSOC, and we pledge to discharge our duties in advancing partnership towards a more resilient and sustainable world. I thank you, Mr. President.
Agradezco al vice.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Lao People's Democratic Republic. I now give the floor to His Excellency Don Pramudwinai, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Thailand.
Mr. President, distinguished delegates, I would like on the outset to extend my warmest congratulations for your election as President of the 77th session of the United Nations General Assembly. And this congratulations also go to your entire team of the presidency. Please rest assured of Thailand's full support as you undertake to fulfill your important mission. We are at the watershed moment as an international community and as the United Nations. We stand at a point where the decision we make and the actions we pursue can shape the world and shape the course of humanity for years to come. But we can only do it together, guided by our shared interest and based on mutual respect. The COVID-19 pandemic has only exacerbated the inequality gaps. It has reversed at least 4 years of development gains, according to the UNDP, and at a time when the world is trying to recover from the 2 years of pandemic, our problems are compounded with multiple challenges. We are seeing new conflicts on top of global geopolitical tensions. We are experiencing the food crisis, the energy crisis, and the financing crisis. These have had the most detrimental impact on those who are most vulnerable, that is LDC and the small island development states, the SIDS, and vulnerable groups such as women, girls, the elderly, and people with disability. Collective action is certainly needed now. Mr. President, the food crisis has affected us all. This global food insecurity stems from the conflicts, climate change disruption, to supply chain and uneven recovery from the COVID-19. There is thus an urgent need to strengthen multilateral action among like-minded partners, United Nations agencies, WTO, and international institutions in facilitating a constructive dialogue and improving policy coordination to address this crisis. It is certainly vital to keep our global supply chains open for seamless cross-border flows of food, fertilizer, and essential goods, by also making our food system more resilient so that equitable access to safe and healthy food for all can be guaranteed. Thailand is prepared to work in partnership with countries and international organizations to realize this vision. In this context, Thailand welcomes the Black Sea Grain Initiative, established by the United Nations to open a safe corridor for grain transportation that would help ease a global food crisis. This initiative further stresses the importance of international cooperation under the UN's framework in order to respond to new global challenges. In addition to overcoming food insecurity, we also need to overcome health insecurity. As we learned from the pandemic, good health for all is critical. And that's why a universal health coverage should be a high priority for us all. We need to ensure access to quality essential healthcare services and access to safe, effective, quality, and affordable essential medicines and vaccines for everyone. We must continue to promote and protect the right to the highest attainable standard of health as part of our commitment to human rights. We must continue to invest in promoting a more inclusive social protection system for all, as called for by the Secretary General in Our Common Agenda report. To reinforce this, the global health architecture needs to be reformed, both structurally and functionally, to address the current shortcomings and systemic failures of health systems. And that's why Thailand fully supports the development of a legally binding international instrument on pandemic prevention, preparedness, and responses under the WHO. The new instrument must place equity at its heart to ensure self-reliance of developing countries when faced with pandemic, especially through enhancing their capacity to manufacture certain medical countermeasures. With better food and health security, we will be better positioned to putting the Sustainable Development Goals back on track. In doing so, a human rights-based approach is needed to ensure that the rights and basic needs of all persons are guaranteed, especially the rights and needs of those most vulnerable and furthest behind. This will help enhance our resilience and capacity to cope with the future crisis. SDGs serve both ways and both as a pathway and the end goals in ensuring survival of our present and future generations. As we have only 8 years left to attain the SDGs, we need to employ every tool at our disposal, from science, technology, and innovation, to working in partnership at every level to drive this agenda forward. Because without sustainable development, there is no future. We need to promote North-South and South-South cooperation and the integration of 2030 agenda with other cooperation frameworks, both at the global and regional levels. And that's why ESCAP and ASEAN are working to enhance the complementarity between the 2030 Sustainable Development Goal agenda and the 2025 ASEAN vision. Thailand's hosting of the Global South-South Development Expo with ESCAP and the United Nations Office for South-South Cooperation in Bangkok last week also demonstrates the importance we place on the development cooperation, especially among developing countries. Furthermore, financing for development and finding innovative sources of finance is key to the transforming SDGs from mere aspiration to reality for all. Thailand agrees with the Secretary General's proposal in promoting cooperation with lending or leading global financial institutions to mobilize finance to drive forward the SDGs while improving financial liquidity for least developed countries. And to promote sustainable development, Thailand has adopted the Bio-Circular Green Economy model, or BCG, as a means to achieve a more balanced development in this recovery phase. The BCG economy model utilizes science, technology, and innovation to encourage the optimization of resources for environmentally friendly economic growth. In pursuing sustainable development, we need to ensure balance between our people-centered approaches and protecting our planet. And to this end, Thailand is ready to work with the international community to contain the triple planetary crisis of climate change, pollution, and biodiversity loss. Thailand is committed to promoting international cooperation for the protection of the environment, including on the negotiations on the post-2020 global biodiversity framework and the international legally binding instrument on plastic pollution. In tackling climate change, Thailand stands firm in our pledge at COP26 last year to achieve carbon neutrality by 2050 and net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2065. And without adequate support, Thailand will be able to increase its nationally determined contribution, or NDC, target to 40% while achieving net zero greenhouse gas emission by 2050. And this is not an empty promise. Thailand will submit our NDC and long-term low greenhouse gas emission development strategies that reflect those goals ahead of the 2022 United Nations Climate Change Conference, or COP26 at Sharm el-Sheikh. Meanwhile, the pledges of developed countries must also be fulfilled. I urge this country to keep their promise of providing financial, technological, and capacity-building support to developing countries and to deliver on the climate finance goal of 100 billion USD annually as soon as possible. Equal attention should be paid on mitigation and adaptation. Thailand stands ready to work with Egypt and all partners at COP26 in this regard. Mr. President, we need to restore faith and confidence in the multilateralism and our United Nations. An important step to achieving this is to reverse the polarization at this body by working more closely on issues that bring us together. Addressing humanitarian concerns is one such issue. Thailand will continue to work closely with the international community, taking into account the needs of the affected country to address urgent humanitarian challenges through bilateral, regional, and multilateral efforts according to the key humanitarian principles without politicization. We have supported humanitarian work in Afghanistan through the World Food Programme and made contributions for Ukraine through the Ukrainian Red Cross and UNICEF. As for Myanmar, Thailand has worked with partners to provide humanitarian assistance to the Myanmar people in need through various programs at bilateral level, including donation of 1 million doses of COVID-19 vaccines, and through ASEAN. Financially, financial contributions were also made to support the work of international organizations such as UNICEF, WHO, WFP, and ICRC. As an immediate neighbor with the longest land border, 2,470 kilometers long, it is in Thailand's vital interest to see a quick return to peace and stability in Myanmar. We call on all parties in Myanmar to urgently undertake steps to de-escalate, end violence, and engage in meaningful talks to resolve differences peacefully. Thailand fully supports the constructive role of ASEAN and believes that ASEAN is best placed to help Myanmar through the time-tested ASEAN practice of consultation, cooperation, and consensus. Thailand will continue to play an active and constructive role to support this ASEAN process, as well as the role of Special Envoy of the UNSG on Myanmar. And as a strong believer of multilateralism, Thailand stands ready to continue to do its part to promote multilateral and international cooperation at all levels. Sustainable development and human rights are intertwined and mutually reinforcing. They are vital in ensuring an environment of peace and prosperity. Thailand hereby presents candidacy for the UN Human Rights Council, HRC, membership for the term 2025 to 2027. And if elected, we can help strengthen the Council and its mechanism to reach out to those vulnerable and those furthest behind, and to bring meaningful and real positive changes on the ground. Thailand also firmly believes that a close regional cooperation can complement the multilateral system and reinforce the global agenda. This year, Thailand plays host to Asia-Pacific Economic Cooperation, or APEC, meeting under the theme of Open, Connect, and Balance. Such theme signifies the willingness to embrace every opportunity, connect in all dimensions, and balance in all aspects. This highlights Thailand's commitment in promoting multilateral cooperation that will hopefully lead to a more balanced and sustainable development after the COVID-19 pandemic. We look forward to welcoming the world leaders to Bangkok in November, as Thailand is fully open and ready to welcome visitors once again. Mr. President and distinguished delegates, despite the challenges and difficulties at this critical juncture in the history of humanity, Thailand continues to have faith in multilateral system with the United Nations at its core, and we remain confident that the goodwill and shared common interests of humanity will help us make the right decision at this watershed moment, so that we can move together towards a more stable, sustainable, and safer future with no person or country left behind. Now, let me add this very brief account to the end of my statement. A few days ago, a sentiment was expressed by the EU foreign policy chief when he said, "Don't rule out the possibilities of the use of nuclear weapons at the Ukraine crisis." An Oriental saying has it, which could be related to this context. It pertains to the enjoyment of riding a beast, whether it's a tiger or the dragon. But let's put a tiger in this context. Riding the tiger back could be fun and challenging. But no one could enjoy riding its back with no end in sight. The question is how to dismount with safety without killing the tiger. Certainly, the question of how to is daunting. Here, we have a suggestion which has taken all elements into account and definitely not a realpolitik free. A possible breakthrough could be apparent during the month of November, as the third week of the penultimate month of the year offers a golden opportunity for all super stakeholders of the Ukraine crisis to assemble at 3 venues in South Asia as legitimate participants. The 3 venues, one in Phnom Penh for ASEAN Summit, another in Bali for G20, and the third in Bangkok, Thailand for APEC leaders meeting. They could separately or in a series serve as a most appropriate platform for talks to provide possible off-ramp or exit to this high-tension global crisis in Ukraine. The world body, UN, with all its relevant roles and mechanisms to help safeguard peace and stability, could certainly join in at any juncture to add value to these endeavors. So let's hope that this golden opportunity is not passed up by all the superpowers, super stakeholders with regard to the high tension Ukraine crisis. I thank you. Thank you very much.
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Thailand. I now give the floor to His Excellency Demeke Mekonnen Hassan, Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia.
Excellency, President of the General Assembly, Excellency, Secretary General of the United Nations, Excellencies, Heads of State and Government, the peace-loving people of our world, ladies and gentlemen. Mr. President, I congratulate you and your country, Hungary, on your election as the President of the General Assembly. I would also like to thank His Excellency Abdullah Shahid for his service and leadership during the 76th General Assembly. I have the greatest honor to speak before this august assembly representing my country, Ethiopia.
We are at a historic crossroads in the evolution of our multilateral system. Humanity is facing multiple and complex challenges ranging from climate change, extreme poverty, conflicts, terrorism, and geopolitical tensions. The consequences of these global challenges are of epic proportions and leave adverse socio-political impacts across the world. Nevertheless, international cooperation is not at a level near the gravity of the challenge. Although climate change and the resulting extreme weather conditions occur throughout the globe, the crisis largely affects the minimally resilient and the least responsible for causing the problem. A case in point is our region, the Horn of Africa, which in some part is highly hit by record-level drought while sustaining extreme flooding in other parts. Mr. President, climate disaster and its insufferable impacts are preventable. I therefore make an urgent call to all states gathered here to translate rhetoric into action. We must realize our climate finance commitments to build resilience and mitigate impact. We should act to meet our emission reduction targets. This requires focused coordination, non-politicization, avoidance of securitization, and good faith cooperation among all stakeholders. I must emphasize, Africa is not responsible for the historic emissions that caused the climate crisis. Yet, we are the ones making the most tangible contribution to mitigate the impacts of climate change. In Ethiopia, our afforestation program, the Ethiopian Green Legacy initiative, saw the planting of billions of seedlings and created a strong culture of afforestation. We are also on a path to sustainable energy transformation and green growth. These proactive programs deserve recognition and tangible support. Mr. President, we have a shared planet and a common destiny. Overcoming our collective challenges require concerted efforts and trusted global leadership. We are gathered here because our forefathers, learning from the tragic episodes of human history, decided to establish the United Nations as the guardian of peace. However, we are yet to achieve true universality in the main organs of the United Nations. Africa has no permanent seats at the UN Security Council. Our quest for African solutions to African problems is yet to be given the respect and support it deserves. We believe these considerations underpin the credibility of the Council in the continent. African problems are sustainably addressed when approached in the true context of the region and take full account of the strategic interests and aspirations of the countries concerned. It is only when we do this and uphold regional solutions we could start reducing the proliferation and overextended study of African issues in the UN Security Council. Mr. President, for the past 4 years, Ethiopia has made significant progress in its socio-economic development and democratization. These years have also been compounded by challenges that tested our survival as a nation. In November 2020, the most heinous and treasonous attack was waged against the Ethiopian National Defense Force that protected not only the peace and stability of Ethiopia, but also helped keep peace in other countries on behalf of the United Nations and the African Union. The criminal group that remains hell-bent in destroying societal foundation of our country colluded with external actors opposed to our development aspirations. The insecurity this group created has been very tragic and costly. Yet, the government of Ethiopia has earnestly tried to avoid this conflict. Regrettably, our efforts to prevent the conflict from igniting were not successful. Thanks to the resolve and determination of Ethiopians, the designs of our adversaries against Ethiopia's progress have been frustrated. We have also paved a path for peace and recovery, relying on the ability of the peace-loving people of Ethiopia to reconcile, make peace among ourselves, and start the process of healing. We thus call for support to our agenda for peace, reconciliation, and reconstruction. We also urge respect for and support to the EU-led peace process. Any other approach, including the politicization of human rights and unilateral coercive measures, will not yield any positive outcome. Mr. President, the past year has also been a milestone for my country and we believe to the entire Nile River Basin. Our project, the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, commenced lighting our homes and fulfilling our intergenerational aspiration. All the glory and gratitude go to the people of Ethiopia who financed this project. The dividend goes far and wide to the entire region. Taking this opportunity, I reiterate Ethiopia's commitment to equity and cooperation in the use of transboundary rivers and shared prosperity with all riparian countries. We will continue in good faith the trilateral negotiation under the auspices of the African Union to reach a mutually acceptable outcome. Mr. President, over the past 3 years, the implementation of the Sustainable Development Goals encountered serious setbacks. The global COVID-19 pandemic has tested our health system. Global trade in goods and services was halted, causing a great deal of loss to our economies. The response by international financial institutions has been below the required level and did not account for the special vulnerability of least developed countries. As the Secretary General of the United Nations put it, it is necessary to turbocharge the implementation of the SDGs. We call for enhanced focus and support to national efforts to improve agricultural and manufacturing productivity, increase investment, facilitate technology transfer, foster fair trade, redouble debt cancellation, and restructuring and enhance international finance for national priority projects. Furthermore, we should enhance the efforts to combat illicit financial flows, unlawful extradition and trade of minerals, and corruption. Africa's youthful population and its vast natural resources should be a source of growth and better jobs. Africa can be the showcase for green and sustainable development. It can feed and power itself and the world. This requires reform of the global financial architecture to ensure more equitable, speedy, and collaborative cooperation based on the needs and potential of least developed countries. More importantly, we must actively support governments that work to create a conducive environment for the prosperity of their countries. In addition, Africa's effort to chart its destiny must not be complicated by big power competition. Mr. President, allow me to conclude by re-emphasizing the need to scale up international cooperation. The gravity of the challenge we face today demands us to come together in search of collective solution. We need more, not less, multilateralism. We shall continue to uphold our cardinal principles of independence, impartiality, integrity, non-interference, sovereign equality, and non-selective to maintain a working multilateral system rooted in the Charter of the United Nations. We need to reform our global institutions to reflect current realities. We need to make them more representative and responsive to the demands of the time. Only through genuine solidarity and concerted action could we ensure collective security and prosperity. I thank you all for your attention and wish you, Mr. President, a successful term of office. I thank you. አመሰግናለሁ።
I thank the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Foreign Affairs of Ethiopia. I now give the floor to His Excellency Sergei Lavrov, Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation.
Madam President, distinguished colleagues, ladies and gentlemen, we are meeting at a difficult, dramatic moment. The crises are growing, and the situation in the area of international security is deteriorating rapidly. Instead of having an honest dialogue and looking for compromises, what we're dealing with is disinformation, coarse stagings, and provocations. The Western line here undermines the trust in international institutions as bodies where interests are agreed. It also undermines trust in international law as a guarantee of fairness and protecting the weak against the strong. The negative tendencies we're witnessing within the UN in a concentrated fashion too. At the UN, which rose from the rubble of German fascism and Japanese militarism and was created to develop friendly relations amongst its members and to prevent conflict among them. The future of the world order is being decided today, and it is clear to any impartial objective. The question is whether or not it is going to be the kind of order with one hegemon at the head of it, making everyone else living, following his notorious rules of benefit to that hegemon only, or are we going to have a democratic, fair world without blackmail and without setting fear into the unwanted, without neo-Nazism and neo-colonialism? We made a firm choice for the latter, and together with partners and like-minded people, calling upon everyone to work for its implementation. What is receding into the past is a unipolar model of world development which served the interests of the 1 golden billion, and its overconsumption level came from the resources of Asia, Africa, and Latin America. Today, we're witnessing sovereign states ready to defend their national interests, and this results in the creation of an equal, socially oriented, and sustainable multipolar architecture. But the objective geopolitical processes are being seen by Washington and fully subjugated to it. The elites of Western countries are considered by them as a threat to their dominating position. The United States and allies want to stop the march of history. So at some point in the past, declaring that they were victorious in the Cold War, Washington erected themselves into an almost envoy of God on earth, without any obligations, but only the sacred right to act with impunity wherever and wherever they want. And this can be done anywhere against any state, especially if they're somehow displeased the self-proclaimed masters of the world. And we do recall the wars of aggressions very far from American shores in Yugoslavia, in Iraq, and Libya, which claimed many hundred thousands of peaceful lives. Were the truly legitimate interests of the West were impacted in any one of those countries? Was English banned or any other language of NATO countries banned there? Mass media, culture? Were the Anglo-Saxons declared to be subhuman, or heavy weaponry was used against them? So what is the outcome of the adventurism of the United States in the Middle East? Has a human rights situation improved? Is the rule of law better? The socioeconomic situation may perhaps stabilized, or people's livelihood is better? Name a country where Washington interfered by force and where, as a result of that, life improved. Trying to restore a one-polar model under the slogan of a rules-based order, West is introducing dividing lines everywhere along the lines of a confrontation between blocs. You're either with us or against us. There is no third option possible. There are no compromises. Continuing with the course to spread NATO to the east and bringing the military infrastructure of NATO to the borders of Russia, the United States now have the goal of subjugating the Asian areas. At the June summit of NATO in Madrid, this self-proclaimed defensive alliance declared the indivisible security of Euro-Atlantic and India and Pacific. And under the slogan of India-Pacific strategies, closed formats are being created, and they undermine what has been built under the ASEAN for decades, namely an open and inclusive regional architecture. And in addition to that, they're playing with fire around Taiwan. On top of that, they're promising military support to Taiwan. Clearly, the notorious Monroe Doctrine is becoming global in scope. Washington is trying to turn the entire world into its own backyard. And the way of doing this is through unlawful unilateral sanctions, which have been for many years used in violation of the Charter and used as a tool of political blackmail. The cynicism here is obvious because these restrictions hit civilians. They prevent them from getting access to basic goods, including medication, vaccines, and food. An egregious example we have here is the American blockade of Cuba, more than 60 years old. The General Assembly has been for a long time and insistently demanding that be immediately lifted, and this is being done by the absolute majority of voices. The Secretary General whose duty include helping implement General Assembly decisions, must, of course, pay special attention to this issue. The Secretary General has a special role also in mobilizing efforts to overcome food and energy crises, which resulted in the wake of an out-of-control money emission in the United States and the European Union during the pandemic, and as a result of irresponsible, unprofessional acts by the European Union in the hydrocarbon fuel markets. Despite common sense, Washington and Brussels compounded the situation when they announced economic war against Russia. As a result, there is a growing price on foodstuffs, fertilizers, oil and gas. We welcome the efforts made by the Secretary General when they helped arrive at the Istanbul agreements on the 24th of June, but they need to be implemented. But so far, the ships with the Ukrainian grain go somewhere, but not into the poorest countries, on the one hand. On the other hand, the impediments by US and EU, the financial and logistical impediments against our grain and fertilizers have not been lifted. Furthermore, for several weeks, we have been saying that about 300,000 tons of fertilizer are being held up in European ports, and we have been proposing that they be forwarded free of charge to the needy countries in Africa. But the European Union is not heeding this. The official Russophobia in the West is unprecedented now. The scope is grotesque. They're not shying away from declaring the intent to inflict the military defeat on our country, but also to destroy and fracture Russia. In other words, what they want to do is to remove from the global map a geopolitical entity which has become all too independent. So how have Russia in the recent decades been infringing on the interests of our opponents? Is it that we cannot be forgiven for making possible the military and strategic détente in the 1980s and 1990s because of my country's position? Or is it that we voluntarily dissolved the Warsaw Treaty Organization and thus removed the reason for NATO's being? Is it that we supported the reunification of Germany without any preconditions and against the position of London and Paris? That we withdrew our military from Europe, Asia, from Latin America? That we recognized the independence of former Soviet republics? That we believed the promises of Western leaders not to expand, not by an inch of NATO in the East, but when it started, agreed to basically legitimize it through signing a founding act between Russia and NATO? Did we infringe on the interests of the West when we warned them that it was unacceptable to bring closer a threatening military infrastructure, bring it closer to our borders? The arrogance of the West, the American exclusivity, have become particularly destructive after the end of the Cold War. Already in 1991, the Deputy Chief of Pentagon, Paul Wolfowitz, in his conversation with the NATO Commando Europe, Wesley Clark, stated openly that, I quote, "After the end of the Cold War, we can use our military without any fear of reprisal. We have 5, maybe 10 years so as to clean out the surrogate Soviet regimes, such as Iraq and Syria, until such time as there is a new superpower who can challenge us." End of quote. And I am convinced that at some point in someone's memoirs, we will find out how the American strategy was being developed as regards Ukraine. But even so, Washington's plans in this regard are obvious in any event. It is possible they are not being forgiven. At the request of the United States and the European Union, we supported the agreement of the Ukrainian president at the time, Mr. Yanukovych, his agreement with the forces of opposition to resolve crisis in February 2014. These agreements were guaranteed by Germany, Poland, and France, but the next morning they were trampled underfoot by the leaders of the bloody coup, who thus humiliated the European mediators. The West simply shrugged and watched in silence how members of the coup started bombing the eastern of Ukraine, where people refused to accept the results of the coup watched as its organizers made into the rank of national heroes the accomplices of Nazis. Were we expected to acquiesce in the Kiev intent to ban the Russian language, education, our mass media and culture, with their insistence on chasing the Russians out of Crimea, on waging war against Donbass, whose citizens were proclaimed by the then authorities and now authorities in Kiev, proclaimed to be not people but specimens? Is it that we violated the interests of the West because we played a role in stopping the forceful actions by the Kiev neo-Nazis in the east of Ukraine, and then demanded that the Minsk package of measures be implemented, something that was unanimously approved by the Security Council, but then laid low by Kiev with the participation of US and EU. For many years, we have been proposing to have security in Europe with the basis on equal and indivisible security enshrined at the highest level in OSCE documents. According to this principle, no one is to strengthen their own security at the expense of others. And the very last proposal to make these agreements legally binding, something that we introduced in December 2021, and the reaction was an arrogant rejection of that. The incapacity of Western countries to negotiate and the continued war by the Kiev regime against their own people left us with no choice but to recognize the dependence of the Donetsk and the Lugansk People's Republics and start a special military operation to protect the Russian and other people on Donbass, and so as to remove the threats against our security, which NATO had been consistently creating in Ukraine at our borders. The operation is conducted in pursuance of agreements on friendship, cooperation, mutual assistance between us and that republic, and on the basis of Article 51 of the UN Charter. I'm convinced that any sovereign, self-respecting state would do the same in our stead, a state which understands its responsibility to his own people. The West is now throwing a fit because of the referenda which are being conducted in the Lugansk, Donetsk, Kharkov, and Zaporozhye oblasts. But people living there are basically only reacting to what was said to them by the head of the Kiev regime, Mr. Zelensky, in August 2021. At the time, he said anyone who feels themselves to be Russian for the benefit of their children and grandchildren to get out and to go to Russia. And that's what the inhabitants of those regions are doing, taking their land with them where their ancestors had been living for hundreds of years. Any unbiased observer can see very clearly the Anglo-Saxons who fully subjugated Europe, for them Ukraine is just an expandable material as they are fighting against Russia. NATO declared that our country is an immediate threat on their way to total domination, and a long-term threat will be the PRC. At the same time, the collective West, headed by Washington, is sending frightening signals to other countries, saying anyone who disobeys can be next. One of the consequences of the crusade by the West against the objectionables is the growing decline of multilateral institutions. They have been turned by the United States and allies into tools to implement their own selfish interests. This is something that is being pursued at the UN, Human Rights Council, UNESCO, and other multilateral institutions. The organizational prohibition of chemical weapons has basically been privatized. Fierce attempts are being made to prevent creating within the Convention on Biological and Toxin Weapons of a mechanism which would ensure transparency for hundreds of military biological programs of the Pentagon has around the world, including on the perimeter of our country and throughout Eurasia. And these programs are far from harmless. This is irrefutable, according to the facts that we came to in Ukraine. There is an assertive line to privatize the UN Secretariat, introducing into its work a neoliberal narrative which ignores the cultural and civilizational multifaceted nature of the world. We call upon making sure that we follow the Charter and ensure a fair geographical representation of member states, making sure that there is no one single country dominant in the Secretariat. An impossible situation was created by Washington, having to do with the obligation of the host country of a headquarters agreement to ensure normal conditions for the participation of all member states in UN work. The obligations under this host country agreement are also placed on the Secretary General, and inactivity is unacceptable. We're also concerned by the efforts made by countries who are undermining the prerogatives of the Security Council. And of course, the Council and UN have to be aligned to contemporary realities. We see the prospect of making the Security Council more democratic exclusively through broadening the representation of the countries from Africa, Asia, and Latin America. We note India and Brazil in particular as key international actors and worthy candidates for permanent membership within the Council, whilst at the same time unilaterally and mandatorily raising the profile of Africa. It is very important today to make sure that all member states unequivocally, without reservations, reaffirm their commitment to the purposes and principles of the Charter as a first and necessary step to restore collective responsibility for the fate of humankind. And that was the reason why in July 2021, a group of friends to support the Charter was created. And co-sponsor of the group was Russia, and it now counts 20 countries. The goal here is to make sure that there is strict abiding with universal norms of international law to counterbalance unilateral approaches, and we call upon everyone to join in. And in this context, great potential is possessed by such organizations as the Non-Aligned Movement, BRICS, SCO, and ASEAN. The Western colleagues are very aggressive in imposing their understanding of democracy as a way of organizing life to all countries, categorically do not want to be guided by democratic norms in international affairs. And a very good example, the situation in Ukraine. Again, it would seem to be that Russia justified its position, has been justifying it for years, and the West said they disagree. Okay, well, let other members of the international community decide for themselves what their position would be, on the side of one, on the side of others, or neutral. That's what happens in democracies when politicians opposing each other defend their viewpoints and try to convey it to others. But the United States and allies do not give the freedom of choice to anyone. They threaten to twist the arms of anyone who dares think for themselves, and demand by threats that countries join in with anti-Russian sanctions. That doesn't work very well, but it is very clear that these acts by United States and its satellites is not democracy. It's pure, unadulterated dictatorship or an attempt to impose it. We're left with a strong impression that the Washington and subjugated Europe are trying to keep their disappearing hegemony using prohibited means. Diplomacy constantly is being replaced by illegal sanctions against competitors in economics, sports, information area, culture, and generally in contacts with people. Let's turn to the problem with visas for delegates for international meetings in New York, Geneva, Vienna, and Paris. There also we see the desire to remove competition, make sure that alternative viewpoints do not come into multilateral discussions. I am convinced that we need to protect the UN and scrape everything that's confrontational and superficial from there and give it back its reputation and an honest platform to siege for balance for all member states. And this is the approach that we're guided up when we put forward our national initiatives. It is of principal importance to make sure that we have a comprehensive ban on the deployment of weapons in space, and this is the reason for the Russia-China draft international treaty considered by the Conference on Disarmament. It's particularly important to protect our cyberspace within the open-ended working group of the General Assembly on the agreements on how to protect international security, and to use a special committee for Universal Convention on how to counter the use of ICT for criminal purposes. We continue supporting Office on Counterterrorism and other anti-terrorist entities within the UN, and we go to continue develop relationships between the UN, CSTO, Eurasian Economic Union, CIS, so as to pool our efforts in the greater Eurasia. We call for an enhanced work on overcoming regional conflicts. We think that the priority here is to overcome the impasse in creating an independent Palestinian state, restoring restoring the state of Iraq and Libya destroyed by NATO aggression, neutralize the threats to Syria, having a sustainable process of national conciliation in Yemen, overcoming the heavy burden of NATO presence in Afghanistan. And we are working on restoring the original JCPOA on Iran nuclear program, ensuring the comprehensive settlement on the Korean Peninsula. Many conflict situations in Africa require that we reject the temptation to play a zero-sum game there, and that outside players consolidate around the initiatives by the African Union. We are concerned by the situation in Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina, where the United States and the EU are stubbornly leading to the destruction of the international legal basis as we currently have it in Resolution 1244 and the Dayton Peaceful Agreement. Madam President, at times like these, it's natural to seek wisdom from our predecessors. So in the pithy expression of the former Secretary General Dag Hammarskjöld, who remembered the horrors of World War, he said, and I quote, "The UN wasn't created to take mankind to paradise, but rather to save humanity from hell." These are very topical words. They call upon us to understand our individual and collective responsibility for creating conditions for a peaceful and harmonious development for our future generations, and everyone need to show political will for that. When we are ready for such honest work, and we are convinced that the stability of the world order can be ensured exclusively through returning to the origins of the UN diplomacy, basing ourselves on the key principle of true democracy, the respect for the sovereign equality of states. I thank you.
Agradezco al ministro de Relaciones.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of the Russian Federation.
Doy ahora.
I now give the floor to His Excellency Sirojidin Muridin, Minister for Foreign Affairs of Tajikistan.
Distinguished Madam President, distinguished Mr. Secretary General, Excellencies, ladies and gentlemen, let me join previous speakers in extending our congratulations to you, Ambassador Chaba Karoshi, on your election as President of the United Nations General Assembly at its 77th session. I wish to take this opportunity to pay a befitting tribute to your predecessor, His Excellency Mr. Abdullah Shahid, for his effective guidance and excellent leadership during the most challenging and uneasy times for the entire humanity. Excellencies, our world is going through turbulent times. We are witnessing the transformation of the existing world order.
Threats such as terrorism, extremism, drug and arms trafficking, cybercrime, and other forms of cross-border organized crime have a tendency to increase exponentially. To further discuss the above-mentioned issues, the government of Tajikistan, the United Nations Office of Counterterrorism, and its partners will be holding a high-level international conference on international and regional border security and management cooperation to counter terrorism and prevent the movement of terrorists in Dushanbe, Tajikistan on 18th, 19th October 2022. We invite you to attend this important conference. Climate change, natural disasters, food insecurity, ongoing impact of the pandemic, among other things, further add fuel to the fire. The international community needs tools that are fit for today's rapidly deteriorating environment. Mechanisms that were established decades ago are now finding it difficult to cope with the emerging challenges. The world needs more robust multilateralism to tackle and toughest challenges with the United Nations at the helm. Therefore, Tajikistan supports the efforts of the United Nations Secretary General aimed at comprehensive reform of the organization to strengthen its capacity to timely and adequately respond to the development needs and efficiently address contemporary threats. There is a historic opportunity to steer change in a direction beneficial for all humanity. It shouldn't be wasted. Mr. President, allow me to address 3 additional topics which are very important for my delegation: implementation of our Roadmap 2030 agenda, water and climate change, as well as peace and security. Tajikistan strongly reaffirms its commitments to the full implementation of the 2030 agenda and its sustainable development goals. As we are lagging behind of many SDGs, the government of Tajikistan has taken bold steps towards integrating SDGs into national policies and development plans. Despite substantial progress made towards the achievement of SDGs, there are significant risks such as climate-related hazards and disasters that could slow and reverse Tajikistan's path towards the realization of 2030 agenda and threaten agricultural productivity and food security. This year, the world has witnessed unprecedented water-related natural disasters. While we all have struggling with the consequences of these water-related disasters, we are becoming increasingly aware that water is vital and a resource we must value, protect, and manage effectively. We need actions that can make a real difference. On 6th, 9th June 2022, we successfully held the second Dushanbe conference in Tajikistan, which became a key preparatory meeting for the midterm review of the water decade in 2023. As you are aware, in 22-24 March 2023, the United Nations will convene its second water conference after 46 years. The UN 23 Water Conference will be a good opportunity for all of us to review and evaluate the progress made and the gaps and obstacles we have encountered in realizing the goals of the water decade. Tajikistan and Netherlands, leading the preparations for this global event, are diligently working and are determined to make the conference a watershed moment for the whole world. To this end, we launched the Water Action Agenda as one of the outcomes of the UN 2023 Water Conference. We expect and encourage everyone to come to the conference with new commitments to enrich the Water Action Agenda. This is important and necessary not only for us today, but for our children, for our future generations. Mr. President, the impact of climate change on water resources is another crucial topic that requires our concerted efforts. Alongside the increase in mud flows and floods, water scarcity and droughts, and changes in the hydrological cycle, today the accelerated melting of glaciers, the primary sources of fresh water on the planet, is of great concern. To this end, Tajikistan is actively promoting an integrated approach to addressing water and climate issues, including within Water and Climate Coalition. During the coalition's first meeting, His Excellency Mr. Emomali Rahmon, President of the Republic of Tajikistan, proposed declaring 2025 as an international year of glaciers preservation. We are currently working on the draft resolution to advance the said initiative through the Second Committee of the UN General Assembly. We seek your constructive engagement and support for this important resolution. Mr. President, response to the ever-increasing threat of terrorism and extremism should be comprehensive, with the UN as a key coordinator. For its part, Tajikistan has undertaken several measures in this direction. We have, among other things, adopted our national strategy and action plan of the Republic of Tajikistan on countering terrorism and extremism for 2021-2025 and expressed our readiness. Tajikistan strongly believes that small states should also have a greater chance to contribute to finding solutions for maintaining peace and security. Hence, following years of contributions to multilateralism through active participation in the United Nations activities and processes, and having unique peacemaking experience and insightful knowledge about Afghanistan, the time has come for Tajikistan to seek for the first time its non-permanent seat on the United Nations Security Council for 2028-2029. We are looking forward to closely working with all the UN member states to gain the trust and support for this vital campaign. Mr. President, Tajikistan, a peace-loving country that went through a devastating imposed civil war, is very aware of its cost and long-lasting consequences. Therefore, we can't stay indifferent to the fate of our immediate neighbors, the noble people of Afghanistan, who have suffered enough for the past 40 years. They deserve peace and tranquility. Exactly 1 year ago, in this same room, the President of Tajikistan, His Excellency Mr. Emomali Rahmon, in his virtual message before the United Nations General Assembly, dedicated more than half of his statement to the situation in Afghanistan. His concerns and warnings, unfortunately, fell on deaf ears. 1 year after the fall of Afghanistan, no inclusive government has been formed despite repeated calls from Afghans, regional countries, and the international community for greater ethnic, political, and geographical diversity in the de facto administrative structures. The country is on the verge of a humanitarian and economic catastrophe. To ease the suffering of the Afghan people during these difficult times, Tajikistan has provided its infrastructure, territory, and communication means to all stakeholders and donor countries to deliver humanitarian assistance directly to the people of Afghanistan. We have also never stopped providing the people of Afghanistan with much-needed electricity since the Taliban came to power. The environment of intimidation and deterioration in respect for human rights, including the rights of women and girls, is overwhelming. Diverging opinions and existing internal contradictions within the Taliban and the emerge of additional armed opposition groups, including ISIL-K and other terrorist groups, make the security situation in the country even more fragile. Furthermore, Taliban's inability to control its militants and other terrorist groups further complicates the already difficult situation. The recent discovery and killing of one of Al-Qaeda's top strategic means in Kabul is a vivid testimony of those ties. Afghanistan is rapidly becoming a safe haven for terrorist groups and a springboard for spreading the Taliban's radical extremism. In addition, we are witnessing systematic work on transferring militant groups consisting of former nationals of Central Asia to the north of Afghanistan, aimed at consolidating and creating a new hotbed of tensions near our border. Unfortunately, the implications for Tajikistan, which shares 1,400 kilometers of border with this country, are enormous. In the current alarming situation, it is paramount for Tajikistan to strengthen its border with Afghanistan and create the necessary border infrastructure along its entire length. At the same time, we believe that the participation of Afghanistan in the process of multi-phased regional cooperation is a key to the success of the efforts undertaken by the international community. Mr. President, on 20 September this year, the leadership of the Kyrgyz Republic delivered his speech from this high rostrum, talked about Kyrgyz version of the conflict on the Tajik-Kyrgyz border. It is regrettable that the issue of settlement of the state border line between Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan, which we inherited from history, are groundlessly raised at the UN General Assembly. I believe it is important to inform you that on September 19, 2022, the authorized representatives of the two sides signed the protocol on the settlement of the situation at the border. All hostilities have ceased. The troops and military equipment of both sides must be withdrawn to their places of permanent deployment. A joint inspection was organized in the border area. A joint task force has been set up to monitor the implementation of the agreement reached. Most importantly, both parties reaffirmed their commitment to resolving all bilateral issues exclusively by political and diplomatic means. Tajikistan has followed and will always follow these principles when any issues arise, including the settlement of the situation on the border. It is with deep regret that Kyrgyzstan is deviating from the agreement reached, creating a false appearance of withdrawing troops and heavy military equipment from the line of contact by hiding them in populated areas near the border. Therefore, the responsibility for any next round of tension on the Tajik-Kyrgyz border will lie exclusively with Kyrgyzstan. The leadership of the neighboring country in their speech mentioned the deaths of their citizens and financial damage, creating the false impression that the tragedy on the border affected them exclusively. The evidences say otherwise. As a result of military aggression of Kyrgyzstan, more than 40 civilians of Tajikistan were killed and about 200 were injured. The casualties include pregnant women, children, elderly, doctors, as well as devout Muslims, attendants of the morning ceremony in the mosque. In addition to border facilities, schools, hospitals, religious buildings, residential buildings, infrastructure, and utilities were destroyed. So who is the aggressor here? Tajikistan is currently channeling significant resources to rebuilding destroyed houses and vital infrastructure. The tragedy that happened in the border area is not accidental. Since the last autumn, our neighbors have been preparing for aggression, which manifested itself in the creation of military infrastructure near our borders. In recent years, our neighbors have often spoken, including from this high restaurant, about the importance of an international transport artery and the creation of favorable conditions for transportation, while advocating the removal of barriers to economic cooperation, the simplification of procedures for passing borders and transit between countries and regions. At the same time, Kyrgyzstan often creates problems for the transit of goods to and from Tajikistan, delaying vehicles with thousands of tons of our cargo. Mr. President, it's important to note that we managed to successfully resolve the border issues with China and Uzbekistan, and this is an achievement of lengthy process for all parties. We have accumulated enough experience, which is important to use in its entirety when resolving border issues on the basis of mutual respect, trust, and openness. Over the 20 years history of negotiations with Kyrgyzstan, we have signed dozens of protocols. However, as time passes with the change of political groups in power, they continuously revisit these documents and implement only those provisions that are in favor of them exclusively, while ignoring the other provisions. As of today, both countries managed to agree on and develop a draft description of about 602 kilometers of our joint border, which is approximately 61% of its total length. Tajikistan, relying on the international practice of border delimitation, has repeatedly offered its neighbors to record the results of these many years of work on paper by signing an agreement on separate sections of the border. But our neighbors strictly declined this proposal. The leadership of Kyrgyzstan mentioned in this high rostrum the agreement on the establishment of the Commonwealth of Independent States and the Alma-Ata Declaration, presenting them as a legal framework for determining the state border. However, I have to emphasize that the issue of determining the border line is not the subject of regulation of these documents. To our deep regret, relying on its unilateral approach, since 1950s, Kyrgyzstan has arbitrarily seized more than 2,110 square kilometers that rightfully belong to Tajikistan. Our neighbors didn't mention anything about it either. I would like to inform the General Assembly that Tajikistan and Kyrgyzstan have reached an agreement on the description of the state borderline according to the documents of the National Territorial Delimitation of 1924-1927. It is these documents that have gone through all the constitutional procedures and accordingly are the only legal framework for continuing the negotiation process. Despite this, in order to show goodwill and maximum flexibility, we met our neighbor halfway and agreed to also use the documents of the 1989 Parity Commission proposed by Kyrgyzstan. Border issues are not resolved by the populist statements and the creation of crisis situation. We need daily, thoughtful, joint work based on the political will on the parties. We stand ready to continue negotiations and firmly believe that the Tajik and Kyrgyz peoples have the right to live and build together an atmosphere of peace, friendship, and harmony. Tajikistan, having survived the horrors of internal conflict, understands the value of peace and will make all its efforts to ensure that security and stability reigns in our region. I thank you for your attention.
I thank the Minister for Foreign Affairs of Tajikistan. I now give the floor to His Excellency Subramaniam Jaishankar, Minister for External Affairs of India.
Madam President, Excellencies, distinguished members of the General Assembly, I bring to you the greetings of 1.3 billion plus people from the world's largest democracy. They join me in congratulating the President of the General Assembly, Ambassador Csaba Kőrösi, on his election to chair the 77th session of the UN General Assembly. They follow closely developments at the United Nations, reflecting the increasingly globalized nature of our existence. We meet at a challenging time for the world order. This session's theme, a watershed moment, transformative solutions to interlocking challenges, seeks to capture its seriousness. Excellencies, the year 2022 is an important milestone in India's journey towards growth, development, and prosperity. India is celebrating 75 years of its independence, what we call Azadi Ka Amrit Mahotsav. The story of that period has been one of toil, of determination, innovation, and enterprise of millions of ordinary Indians. They are rejuvenating a society pillaged by centuries of foreign attacks and colonialism. And they are doing so in a democratic framework whose steady progress is reflected in more authentic voices and grounded leadership. This new India, under the visionary and dynamic leadership of Prime Minister Narendra Modi, is a confident and resurgent society. Its agenda for our centenary will be achieved through the 5 pledges that we committed to on our Independence Day. 1, we are resolved to make India a developed country in the next 25 years. For the world, that creates more capacities for global good. 2, we will liberate ourselves from a colonial mindset. Externally, this means reformed multilateralism and more contemporary global governance. 3, our rich civilizational heritage will be a source of pride and of strength. This includes care and concern for the environment, so ingrained in our traditional ethos. 4, we will promote greater unity and solidarity. This expresses a coming together on global issues such as terrorism, pandemics, or the environment. And 5, we will instill consciousness of duties and responsibilities. This applies to nations as much as it does to citizens. These 5 pledges affirm our age-old outlook that sees the world as one family. We believe that national good and global good can be entirely in harmony. It is this conviction that led us to supply vaccines to over 100 nations. Similarly, our evacuation operations in HADR situations always had room for other nationals in distress. Even as we meet our own development targets, India offers partnerships to our brothers and sisters in Asia, in Africa, and Latin America. And we do so based on their needs and their priorities. Today, the focus is on green growth, better connectivity, digital delivery, and accessible health. Our solidarity is not just in words. You can see them in 700 projects across the world. Madam President, even while India contributes to global betterment, we recognize the sharp deterioration in the international landscape. The world is already struggling with challenges of post-pandemic economic recovery. The debt situation of the developing is precarious. To this is now added the rising costs and the shrinking availability of fuel, of food, and of fertilizers. These, along with trade disruptions and diversions, are among the many consequences of the Ukraine conflict. The Indo-Pacific, too, witnesses fresh concerns about its stability and its security. And climate events have added an overlay on these mounting anxieties. As we saw in the case of the COVID pandemic, the South will be the most impacted, even if the immediate causes are well beyond. It is imperative that global conversations recognize this deep unfairness. The inequity of vaccine distribution should not be replicated in other domains. Madam President, as the Ukraine conflict continues to rage, we are often asked, whose side are we on? And our answer each time is straight and honest. India is on the side of peace and will remain firmly there. We are on the side that respects the UN Charter and its founding principles. We are on the side that calls for dialogue and diplomacy as the only way out. We are on the side of those struggling to make ends meet, even as they stare at the escalating costs of food, of fuel, and fertilizers. It is therefore in our collective interest to work constructively, both within the United Nations and outside, in finding an early resolution to this conflict. Excellencies, while the global attention has been on Ukraine, India has also had to contend with other challenges, especially in its own neighborhood. Some of them may be aggravated by the COVID pandemic and ongoing conflicts, but they speak too of a deeper malaise. The accumulation of debt in fragile economies is of particular concern. We believe that in such times, the international community must rise above narrow national agendas. India, for its part, is taking exceptional measures in exceptional times. We do so when we send 50,000 metric tons of wheat and multiple tranches of medicines and vaccines to Afghanistan. When we extend credits of $3.8 billion to Sri Lanka for fuel, essential commodities, and trade settlement. When we supply 10,000 metric tons of food aid and vaccine shipments to Myanmar. When we fill the gap in humanitarian needs left unaddressed by political complexity. Whether it is disaster response or humanitarian assistance, India has stood strong, contributing particularly to those nearest to us. Excellencies, the world as we knew it is poised for transformational changes. It has been impacted in recent times by a succession of shocks